This is Tread Boldly, Leadership Lessons from the Saints, with Father Nathan Cromly.
Hey, I'm glad to be back with you again. I want to speak with you today about St. Peter and St. Paul. All of us Christians know who they are, St. Peter being the head of the body of the apostles, the rock on which Christ would build his church, the first pope, right? And St. Paul being the missionary to the Gentiles, going on the highways and the byways and the adventures of the missionary endeavor to make Christ known throughout the Mediterranean basin. But for as much as most people know who they are, not a lot of them have considered the realism of what the Bible teaches us about their lives as leaders. In fact, we find in the relationship between St. Peter and St. Paul something that a lot of us experience every single day in our businesses or in our families. Anytime you have an organization, two things are necessary. First, stability, and second, growth. Well, if you look at the lives of the early church, it was the same. St. Peter was given the job by Christ to be the rock based upon which he would build his church, and he had the responsibility of dealing with the thousands of converts who had instantaneously been converted on the day of Pentecost. Remember, if you look back to the Acts of the Apostles, chapter 2, when St. Peter begins to preach, thousands of people are converted in a single day. And if you can continue with that effort, we see the church was growing and being built up in Acts chapter 4, such that you could reasonably be suspected that there are tens of thousands of Christians in Jerusalem, with St. Peter needing to solve for all of their problems. And we read about some of those in the Acts of the Apostles, things that happen in any organization. But the burden of leadership must have been immense. Every problem had to be solved, and had to be solved with the authority that he had been given. And of course, that was shared with the other apostles who helped him in government, but it quickly became something that was all-consuming. He needed to build an organization, build a structure, become the stability that would allow people to find their shape, find their place, and give the best that they could to God through that organization called the church. And at the same time, you've got this St. Paul figure, and he was called by God to go and expand the church, to go into places where the church had never been planted before, and to make something happen for Christ. And that's exactly what we did through the ministry of the word, through miracles and signs, through his efforts and his preaching. St. Paul expanded the structure, bringing in new people, new energies, and encountering new dilemmas that he had to face himself. Well, obviously, there you find a tension. It's a tension that every business knows and every family knows, between the harmony that currently exists and then the ever-changing environment that surrounds us. As a parent, you can find that harmony of peace where everybody is humming and just doing great, and it lasts for about a day. And then someone gets sick, and then something happens in the family, then something happens at school, right? And you have to readjust to try to find that harmony again. Of course, the same holds true in our businesses. You have to be like St. Peter. St. Peter had to constantly adjust to a growing environment by finding the harmony, making sure that everyone can give their gifts in a way that benefits everybody else. But we all know that for most people are like seeds. If you keep seeds in a barrel, they rot. Right? A family wasn't made just to be insular and kept with everything under control, even if it's in harmony. A family was made to expand. And so you are there to send your children forth into this world, just like a company is made to grow. If the church isn't crying, she's dying, right? Now that means innovation. That means growth. That means new initiatives. That means change. And we have to be like St. Paul, able to do that. Well, the two of these can sometimes come into tension. And it's very famous both in the Acts of the Apostles and Acts chapter 15, where St. Paul explains to St. Peter what he's doing, and they have to debate the subject before Peter finally agrees and sanctions Paul's actions. Or again in Galatians, where St. Paul talks about how much he struggled with the fact that Peter seemed to be dragging his feet and adopting the very things that he was supposed to be sanctioning. There was tension between these two, and that tension is a good tension. The church shows us this by celebrating St. Peter and St. Paul on the same feast day, the feast of St. Peter and Paul, and always mentioning the two names together, because in that tension between structure and growth, between the past and the future, lies a creative moment from the Holy Spirit. God works through that tension, but we need to be able to hold it and to use it for Him. We need to face problems and tread boldly.
Ooh, I love it.